Welcome back, everyone, to Meditations by Gregory T. Obert, bringing you the best new guided meditations and mental health discussions every week. I'm your host, clinical psychologist, Dr. Gregory T. Obert. Thank you so much for joining me today. And boy, do I have a wonderful special treat for all of you out there. I had the wonderful fortune of being contacted by just an incredible expert in the field of mindfulness. And I talk about mindfulness a lot on the show, how it fits nicely with meditation. And man, I'm so excited to talk to this wonderful person. But before that, I want to give you all a little bit of a background on who she is. So, Margaret Cullen is a licensed psychotherapist and meditation teacher who spent over 40 years integrating contemplative practices into settings where real healing is needed most. Margaret co-developed compassion cultivation training at Stanford with, and I'm probably going to butcher their name, I'm sorry, Thupten Jinpa, and mindfulness-based attention training for military spouses alongside Amishi Ya, and founded Compassion Corps to bring these life-changing practices to underserved communities worldwide. As a Mind and Life Institute Fellow and Advisory Board Member for the Global Compassion Coalition, she is committed to making mindfulness and compassion accessible to all. And her upcoming book, Quiet Strength, Find Peace, Feel Alive, and Love Boundlessly Through the Power of Equanimity, is set for release on March 10th of 2026. And Margaret's work offers practical pathways to the sense of calm strength that you aim to cultivate that I aim to cultivate for my audience, and hopefully you all aim to cultivate for your audiences, friends, family, and the self. So without further ado, Margaret, it is such a pleasure to have you. Thank you for being on the show, and welcome.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
Of course, it is such a pleasure, and your career is just amazing. As I was reading about your accomplishments, you have done so much in your life to promote mindfulness and inner healing. And I just, I would love to hear a little bit, as well as my audience, I'm sure, how you got to this point.
Yes, well, as you said, 40 plus years is a long story, but something I wrote about in the prologue of my book is that I basically followed the pretense of accident. And this is a quote from the famous Tibetan teacher, uh, uh, Chogyam Trungpa. Sharon Salzberg, who's a meditation teacher some of you may have heard of, went to Trungpa when she was in college, and she asked him how to find a meditation teacher in India. This was back in the 70s. And his reply was, just follow the pretense of accident. And I love that kind of allusion to what Jungians might call synchronicity. You know, it has different names in different wisdom traditions. But I definitely have followed the pretense of accident. I became a therapist. I had a kind of private meditation practice. I was working with cancer patients, doing support groups for cancer patients and their loved ones, which I did for about 30 years actually. And the person running the organization said, "Hey, you're a meditator, aren't you?" Which I thought was a secret. You know, at the time, it wasn't something we talked about with everybody. People thought it was weird 40 years ago.
I'm
You
sure.
you don't remember, you're too young,
No,
but
I did not.
people thought it was really weird then. So you just didn't tell everybody if you meditated. Um, and I said, "Yeah, I am." And he said, "Well, we'd like to pay you to take this class called Mindfulness Based Stress Reduction and see if it'll fit for our cancer patients. We want to make sure that it's non denominational. We don't want anything Buddhist. We don't want it to be religious
Mhm.
because our groups are open to everyone and you can evaluate it." So they paid me to take one of the first classes that was offered. in Southern California. And that's where the pretense of accident, well, it didn't exactly start there, but professionally it started there. Um, so I was paid to take that class. I fell in love with it, and I became one of the first 10 people to be certified as a mindfulness-based stress reduction teacher. And I worked closely with John Kabat-Zinn, who developed MBSR how many years ago now? I don't know, long, long time ago. And I was there in the very early days. I introduced the program to Kaiser Permanente in Northern California. I developed a program for physicians, um, and various other accidents happened. So I'll fast forward to the next accident. I created a program called Mindfulness-Based Emotional Balance that brought together emotion training with mindfulness. And this was done in research settings, not in the public. We did a lot of research on this program, and I traveled around to teach it. And I was invited to give a presentation to the Mind and Life Institute. And Thubten Jimpa, who you mentioned, he's the primary translator for the Dalai Lama, and he has written with the Dalai Lama most of the books the Dalai Lama has written in the past 40 years. Um, he's a scholar, a translator, and he was at this meeting. And this is just, can I tell you a funny story?
Please, I would love to hear it.
Okay. So I'm getting on the plane to go to this meeting. It was in Wisconsin. We were meeting at the lab of Richie Davidson, who's a very famous meditation researcher at University of Wisconsin in Madison. And I was really stressed out. I had a young child then. It was hard to get out of the house. I was late for the plane. I was scrambling. I was sure I forgot something important that I needed for the meeting. I got on the plane and had a little encounter with a woman who wouldn't just move her bag a little bit so I could get mine in the overhead compartment. And I said something, I don't know what, but it wasn't equanimous and it wasn't mindful. Um, and I looked up, and there was Thubten Jimpa, whom I had never met, who was, you know, as close to the Dalai Lama as anybody could possibly be, smiling at me. And I felt so embarrassed, and I just crumpled into my seat. I don't know if I knew exactly in that moment if he would be at the meeting, but there he was. We were sitting around a conference table. There were 10 of us maybe when I presented my work, and Jimpa was there. And at some point he said, "Can I talk to you in the hall?"
Uh
And I
oh.
thought, uh-oh, I had just, we opened our meeting with a meditation and they asked me to guide it. And I said, okay, sure. So I guided this meditation for these luminaries in my field. And then Jimpa says, I'd like to talk to you. I thought, the first thought that went through my mind was, I don't think you should teach meditation. I saw your behavior on the plane.
Mm.
And instead, he said, Um, I've been invited by Stanford University to create a mainstream program on compassion cultivation. Will you help me? So
So here
it
you are
wasn't,
thinking you're going to get called into the hallway to get dressed down
yeah,
by the principal. And instead, it's this
exactly,
wonderful opportunity for you.
exactly. So that was another big pretense of accident. There were so many, but so then I went from 15 years of teaching mindfulness in many, many mainstream settings to helping Jimpa do the same thing for compassion training, to kind of take the really highly articulated technology of heart and mind that Buddhist philosophy has developed and offer it in a universal, accessible way to mainstream participants. And so I did that for about 15 years. And different wonderful accidents happened, and I won't go into all of them, but I'll tell you one more. I was listening to a talk by a meditation teacher I love named Joseph Goldstein on equanimity. And I thought, wow, I could operationalize this. I could do the same thing for equanimity that John Kabat-Zinn did with mindfulness and Jimpa did with compassion. Equanimity is another universal virtue that really lends itself to a, a scope that's broad, that's accessible, that's available no matter what your uh, religion is, or non-religion, faith or non-faith. So that led to developing workshops in equanimity and eventually the book that I just wrote.
And again, for those that have only sort of been listening, I'm with Margaret Cullen talking about her career in mindfulness. And I just have to say, just so much gratitude from me to you about everything that you've done up to this point in your career, because as someone who does a lot of work with veterans, I cannot tell you the number of times I've had to bring in mindfulness teachings. In fact, I had a whole treatment for mindfulness based stress reduction when I was doing substance use treatment with the veterans. And it is such a game changer. And I totally believe you that as you were first learning about all of that back in the 80s, you were probably looked at like you had 14 heads. So the fact that you stuck with it, as well as all of the other people that you mentioned, I'm just so grateful that you stuck with it and brought such a wonderful treatment to the world. And really not just treatment, but really philosophy, way of living our lives by being more mindful. Even when, like on the plane, we don't always do it. It's progress, not perfection, right?
Exactly, exactly.
So you mentioned then that your next sort of task or project is this book on equanimity. And for those that are not familiar, can you talk a little bit about what that is and why it's so important to you?
Yes, it's been interesting. I started this project maybe 5 years ago. I've been talking a lot about equanimity, and people say, what are you doing? I'm writing a book on equanimity. And the people I know are very well educated, most of them, and a surprising number look at me kind of, well, what is that? What is equanimity? It's a funny word. We don't use it much. It sounds a little, I don't know, maybe old-fashioned or pretentious. I'm not sure what, as an adjective to say, oh, you seem very equanimous, Gregory. It would sound kind of ridiculous. They're just not words that are kind of common in everyday talking. So, as I dove into it, I discovered that not a lot had been written or taught about equanimity for a number of reasons. It's very simple, but it's not easy. I can boil it down for a simple definition, which I will for you, but it's actually at the same time very nuanced, excuse me, and very complex. So there's a fair amount of paradox that needs to be tolerated with equanimity, along with most other spiritual concepts. We really have to open to a certain degree of paradox because they are a both and. They are this simple thing on the one hand, mindfulness, paying attention, being present, but very well it's much, much, much bigger than that,
Sure, the
much
definition
deeper.
doesn't really do it justice. I can break it down as definition, but there's really much more to it than that.
exactly. So for equanimity, the way I'm talking about it these days is the ability to experience life without being hooked by it. That's the simplest definition. Um, in reality, just like me on the plane, we have a lot of small moments, some big moments of getting hooked. And in that case, equanimity really has more to do with how quickly we unhook. So, practically speaking, equanimity in day-to-day life has a lot to do with regaining equilibrium,
Okay.
with the idea that we're always losing equilibrium moment by moment, kind of like walking. Every step we're off balance and then we're back in balance. So coming back into balance is equanimity. And what's challenging, you asked about this particular moment, is that mostly we're out of balance kind of emotionally and psychologically. It certainly it's connected to our nervous systems. They're all related. And a lot of the systems in our bodies get out of balance too. Um, but we're facing kind of unprecedented impositions on our nervous systems so that we're off balance and hooked almost all the time. And it's never been more important, I think, than now to have tools and methods for regaining balance. And, we could talk about that and from a lot of different perspectives. Um, but I'll stop there, see if
Yeah,
that makes sense.
I think so. Let me test my understanding here. So when you say hooked and how we can be kind of off balance, I'm thinking about how we can give our emotional energy to a topic and maybe it sort of takes us over a little bit. And then we have to kind of pull back and maybe, I don't like the word detach as much, but I guess to borrow from um, more mindfulness literature, kind of defuse from the thought and take our energy back. And when you were talking about um, well, we do have a lot of unprecedented ways for us to get hooked into life. The immediate first thing that I thought about was smartphones and social media. But am I sort of on base as far as what equanimity is all about?
Very much so. And I love that you chose not to use the word detach. I agree completely. And this is one of the subtle aspects of equanimity that can be hard for people to wrap their minds around. Equanimity doesn't mean not caring, it doesn't mean not feeling, actually. It doesn't, in fact, the near enemy of equanimity is indifference or
Mm,
apathy. But the question and the beauty and the promise of equanimity is how do we care without being overwhelmed?
mm,
How do we care without being hooked? And the way we do that is greater spaciousness. That's different. So detaching is pushing away. We'll just use a kind of physical metaphor. Detach, we push away. That's avoidance, suppression, denial, right? And that is a strategy a lot of us use
mhm.
for unhooking. And as you well know, it doesn't work in the end because it doesn't go anywhere.
Yeah. It
We
works in
avoid
the
it for
short
a
term,
while.
and then, but the
Yeah,
long term, you really kind of screw yourself over.
exactly. Exactly. So rather than detach, we get bigger so that we hold it without being consumed by it. We become more spacious. So we're not as threatened by the feelings. We don't contract around them. We don't perpetuate them, fuel them, feed them. We get bigger so that we allow them to kind of take their own course. And the interesting thing about emotions is that when we don't interfere with them, they come and go very quickly.
Yeah. except they can be uncomfortable sometimes, so we have to push them away and shove them down, right? But exactly what you said, that doesn't make them go away. In fact, it just gives us distress.
Yes. Yes. So when they're uncomfortable, we tend to push them away. But when they're comfortable, we tend to hold on to them. And that's problematic too. So this spaciousness goes both ways. In fact, some of the research that I did that I found really fascinating had to do with equanimity across the major religions and how equanimity is thought about in Judaism and Islam and Christianity, Buddhism, Taoism,
Mm-hmm.
Hinduism. And in most traditions, this is very interesting. There's a lot of overlap around how equanimity is described as our relationship to the constantly changing winds of fortune, praise and blame, gain and loss, pleasure and pain. And it's both sides.
Mm-hmm.
Do you get attached and really pumped up with praise? Do you totally crash with blame? Or can you hold them both with more spaciousness and less contraction?
Mm-hmm. As you're talking, the first thing I'm thinking about is I don't really know anything about your psychotherapy career, but I suspect you're very DBT with the dialectic there of can I hold both of these things true at the same time? And what a great point about how sometimes people do try to cling to the good feeling, and yeah, they feel great, but then if we hold on too tight, well, eventually it's going to go away, and now maybe we're regretting, we're stuck in the past, and that's not great either. So great point about how it's not just the negative emotions we think about that we kind of want to get rid of. Sometimes we need to let go of the more positive ones too.
Yeah, I mean, the more gracefully we can meet the absolutely unavoidable changing circumstances of our lives, the more balanced and equanimous we will be. The more we hold on to something that's gone, push away something that's here, those postures put us off balance, as it were.
Yeah. So let me ask you this then, with your book coming out, and again, I want to make sure that I get the date right. That is March 10th of 2026 as we record this. And the book, again, for those out there, Quiet Strength, Find Peace, Feel Alive, and Love Boundlessly Through the Power of Equanimity. Um, Tell me a little bit, and the audience, of course, about how this book can help them be a little bit more equanimous. Did I say that right? Is that the right conjugation?
Equanimous, yes.
Equanimous, thank you.
Yes. Yeah, my publisher tried to talk me out of taking equanimity out of the title altogether. I mean, originally, equanimity was the title. Now it's in the subtitle.
Mhm.
But yeah, it's a mouthful. Equanimous, even more so. Um, the good news about equanimity is that there are many, many doorways to equanimity. And certainly meditation is one, and that's the name of your podcast. And there are meditations that are designed specifically to cultivate equanimity, and they're in my book. And and they can be done in a Buddhist context, and they can be done completely outside of a Buddhist context. Um, so that's one way. Another really wonderful way to access equanimity is perspective taking. It seems so simple and so obvious, but we forget it. One of the things that happens when we're hooked is that we lose perspective.
Mhm.
Our suffering, whatever it is that we're hooked by, completely takes over, and our sense of proportion is gone. We lose a lot of really important data about ourselves and the world, about impermanence, for example. We forget that things change. So that's one of the first things is remembering impermanence. And I joke because a lot of our mothers or grandmothers maybe said, "This too shall pass," and you know, it's kind of seems so trite. And yeah, 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 we know that intellectually. Everybody's heard it. Yes, we believe it. But in that moment, we forget the truth of impermanence, and it helps to remember this too shall pass. So this experience is wonderful, and it's not going to last forever.
Yeah.
So when it changes, I don't have to be crushed or shocked or take it personally because it's just the nature of life. And this moment that is so awful will also pass.
Yeah.
Um, so that's one dimension of perspective. Another one that's really important, and therapists, I'm sure you talk about this all the time, well, a lot of the time with your clients, is the nature of life tends to be less personal than what we believe. And in those moments when we're hooked, it can be helpful to check in with how personally we're taking things and ask, is that really true? And how much do we really know? So that's a perspective taking hack just in the moment.
You mean sometimes
Am I,
people do things without making me the focus of their lives and why they're doing things? Shocker.
it's so shocking that it isn't all about me.
Yeah, right.
Um,
If only. That'd be great, but
And speaking of which, so perspective taking can happen cognitively, remembering impermanence, remembering how much of the world is actually impersonal, a lot more of it than we tend to think.
Mhm.
Um, Looking through through the lens of history and the arc of time. And, in therapy, in 5 years, how important will this be to me? That's a kind of perspective taking that can help us unhook from the intensity of the moment. Other ways are humor. Humor is one of my favorite. I interviewed someone for my book called Swami Beyondananda, who's a Buddhist comedian. Um, and we talked a lot about humor. What I love about humor is that it breaks the spell. When we're hooked, we're in a trance. We are literally in a trance and we're totally believing what our emotions are telling us. And often when we wake up from the trance, when we unhook, we recognize, oh my, I can't believe I thought that and felt that. So humor is a great ally in breaking the trance of being hooked. Of course, nature is incredible. We regain perspective in nature. Our sense of how big we are and how important we are gets recalibrated in nature.
Mhm.
Um, there's so many ways that nature helps.
Yeah. Well, what amazing action-packed value, action-packed, high-value stuff that you're bringing to this episode. And again, to recap for those that are listening to this, we can talk about ways to be more equanimous, and one of those being humor, one of those being taking some time to be out in nature, and just that simple question, how that can change everything so quickly. How important is this going to be to me 5 years from now? Really can help people unhook quite a bit. And this is just a taste of what is in the book. So I am sure there's even more action packed stuff in there. You already mentioned a few meditations. So it sounds like just an amazing resource for people to dive into to help them. I'm trying to think of the way you said it earlier, sort of expand themselves a bit more.
Yes, spaciousness is a word I really like a lot because when we're hooked, we tend to contract. There's a way that we contract around that experience. We get a lot smaller. Our perspective gets a lot narrower. We don't see clearly. We see only that which affirms whatever it is we're preoccupied with. Um,
Which, of course, doesn't doesn't leave for an effective, healthy life if all we're doing is focusing on this tiny, or I don't want to say tiny, but just this very present point that may or may not be accurate to what's going on in our lives because we've been hooked and now we're in that trance, like you're saying. So, how we are viewing our lives and the world and others around us might just be completely skewed. Well, let me ask you this then, because you've just brought so much value to the show here, and I truly appreciate that. For people that want to learn a bit more about you and what you do, I mean, I would talk to you for hours at this point, but I know that that's probably feasible for your schedule. Where can people learn more about you, connect with you, find you, and just really take their mindfulness, equanimity, and just mental health to the next level?
Right now, my website is the best place at margaretcullen.com. I am doing, at this point, a monthly newsletter, so you can sign up for it on my website. I'll be doing some book talks, and there's also there's a page of publications, quite a wide range of articles. There are some free guided meditations on my website. I think there's an equanimity practice on my website. Um, there's a little more information on equanimity, compassion, mindfulness, and forgiveness, the areas that I've taught, and guided meditations in all of those areas you can access on my website.
That's wonderful. So margaretcullen.com. And again, her upcoming book, you guys got to put this on your wish list. You got to get it. It's going to have a lot of value in it. I can already tell. Quiet Strength, Find Peace, Feel Alive, and Love Boundlessly Through the Power of Equanimity. Now, is that on Amazon, where you get print books, all the above?
Yeah, all of the above. It's available for pre-sale on Amazon, but it will be available through your local bookstore or any independent bookseller as well.
Wonderful. Well, if you guys got any value from this episode, go support Margaret. Those pre sales mean a lot to publishers. Go put it on your wish list, go pre order it. Did you do an audiobook as well, out of curiosity?
Yes, there's an
Perfect. You
audiobook.
can listen to it. You can get this
Yeah.
book beamed into your brain however you want, either visually or uh, or orally. Well, all right. Margaret Cullen, it was an absolute pleasure getting the chance to speak with you today. Thank you so much for bringing all of your wisdom and knowledge to the show and for all that you've done outside of this show before we've recorded and what you will continue to do after. For everyone else, thank you so much for listening. Be sure to check out Margaret and support her. I appreciate all of your support with my show. I will be back next week with either another meditation or an action-packed interview, so stay tuned. But until next time, be safe, be well, and be powerful.